Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a pretty unsettling collision between one of history's most notorious figures and the incredibly cold, rationalist philosophy of Baruch Spinoza. Now, I know it sounds like a brutal, maybe even uncomfortable exercise, right? Looking at someone like Charles Manson through a 17th century philosophical lens. But doing this actually strips away our standard emotional reactions. It brings us incredible conceptual clarity to how we fundamentally view human nature, crime, and punishment. So, look at it this way. At first glance, a man who completely rejected human laws might actually seem like the ultimate expression of wild liberty. He acted on impulse, he vehemently rejected traditional morality, and he basically considered himself entirely above the law of man. It's so easy to look at that kind of radical defiance and see it as a dark form of freedom. But today, we're going to challenge that very assumption. Was he truly a master of his own destiny, or was he literally trapped in a prison of his own making? To navigate these dense philosophical waters, here is our roadmap for the explainer. First, the illusion of power. Second, the innocence of the snake. Third, the existentialist pushback. And finally, number 4, being determined to determine. Okay, moving right into section 1, the illusion of power, or Manson as the broken machine. So when we think of power, we usually think of having control over other people, right? Manson had followers who literally hung on his every word, totally ready to commit atrocities on his command. In popular culture, that looks like this terrifying, almost supernatural power. But Spinoza, he would argue that Manson didn't possess true power at all. In fact, he represented what Spinoza calls impotentia, basically the absolute lowest degree of human power. Manson really believed he wielded immense agency by manipulating his followers and orchestrating these tragedies. But Spinoza reveals this as just a tragic confusion. You see, there's a massive, fundamental difference between the sheer brute force required to just destroy things and the real, rational power to actually understand and govern yourself. Notice how this framework totally shifts our perspective. Instead of looking at a man making free, calculated choices, we're essentially looking at a biological entity that is just reacting to overwhelming passive passions. He was entirely governed by deep-seated paranoia, profound hatred, unchecked resentment, and this incredibly desperate, sick need for fame. In Spinoza's view, if you submit to your passions, you're a slave to external causes, like your past or your traumas. You aren't driving the car, you're just being dragged behind it. So, in this light, Manson wasn't a free agent at all. He was reacting exactly like a broken machine. Now, to really see why his actions were so devastating, we have to understand the Spinozist ethical ideal. This is known as the composition of relations. Basically, ethical beings are fundamentally meant to associate and combine to make each other stronger. Think of it like this. When two reasonable beings meet, they form a stronger, more capable collective individual. They harmonize. By combining their strengths and rational minds, they mutually increase each other's power of living and their overall autonomy in the world. But Manson did the exact opposite of that ethical ideal. Instead of combining and building, he functioned mathematically like a toxic virus. He didn't seek out vulnerable young people to increase their power, he sought them out to break their autonomy and systematically decompose their spirits. For Spinoza, whatever destroys, poisons, and separates mathematically falls under the category of evil, which he characterizes as the absolute lowest degree of reality. That brings us to section 2, the innocence of the venomous snake and the end of ordinary morality. The crucial point here is the fundamental distinction between morals and ethics. Just think about how we process crime today. We want a villain, don't we? We want someone to point at so we can say, that is evil and I am good. Classical morality is intellectually easy. It gives us simple rules, convenient scapegoats, and the comfort of feeling virtuous just by condemning a monster. Spinozist's ethics, however, completely shatters that comfort. Ethics doesn't judge, it understands. It forces us to take a clinical step back and see a crime not as this satanic, purely free choice, but as the inevitable, mechanical consequence of a broken nature acting under severe stress. And here is the metaphysical shock. This idea breaks from thousands of years of penal systems that are based entirely on the concept of free will. Because if a person is merely the blind sum of their heredity, their environment, and their traumas, the very idea of moral culpability collapses entirely. Metaphysically speaking, everyone is innocent. A person is as innocent of their own madness as a rock is innocent of falling to the ground when you drop it out of a window. Gravity dictates the rock, trauma and biology dictate the man. But wait, you might be wondering, if everyone is perfectly innocent, doesn't society just collapse into total anarchy? Well, this perfectly illustrates Spinoza's brilliant clinical solution. Think of a venomous snake or a rabid dog. It hasn't sinned. It didn't wake up one day and choose to be toxic or rabid, right? It is completely morally innocent, but we neutralize it without hesitation. We lock away the dangerous, not out of moral vengeance or some desire to punish, but as a necessary quarantine to protect the collective social body. It's what Spinoza calls the collective conatus, our shared innate drive to survive, persist, and protect ourselves as a community. Reframing things this way requires almost superhuman mental effort. Justice suddenly becomes a societal immune system, not the armed branch of divine retribution. We have the absolute right to lock up the criminal to maintain safety, yes, but we do not have the right to hate them. To hate the criminal is to remain ignorant. It means sinking to their level of sad, destructive passion, rather than elevating ourselves to understand that they are merely the tragic plaything of causes entirely beyond their control.
Let's move on to Section 3, the existentialist counterattack, where we reclaim human dignity and responsibility.
Let's be real, telling a society traumatized by violence that a killer is just a defective plant or a broken machine is incredibly difficult to digest. So we have to look at the philosophical pushback. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Viktor Frankl offer a radical counterargument to this cold determinism. If we completely accept that a human being is just a biological machine, we run headfirst into a massive philosophical wall. Existentialists argue that reducing a person to a mere product of trauma actually strips them of their fundamental human dignity. Existentialism declares that no matter what has been done to us, no matter how terrible our past or our conditioning, we remain entirely responsible for what we make of it. To judge someone, therefore, is to respect them. It's a way to recognize them as a free subject, capable of agency, not just as a caged animal devoid of choice. Furthermore, on a purely psychological level, the analogy of the venomous snake shows its sharp limits here. Victims don't just need physical security going forward, they require justice, profound recognition of the harm done to them, and sometimes, eventually, the space for forgiveness. You simply cannot forgive a virus. You literally cannot effectively mourn in the face of a mathematical equation. Human morality inherently requires a notion of fault and responsibility so that victims can grieve properly, rebuild their lives, and actually find true justice in a society that validates their suffering. Which leads us to Section 4, Determined to Determine and Breaking the Fatalism Trap. So, this leaves us in quite a dilemma. We're caught right between the deterministic machine of Spinoza and the fully responsible, free human of the existentialists. If everything is strictly determined by prior causes, you might naturally ask, well, why bother with personal growth at all? Why not just give up? But here is Spinoza's most luminous nuance. Determinism is not fatalism. While Manson was determined by sad, destructive causes, you are determined right now by your desire to seek clarity, to learn, and to move toward the light of understanding. You are a completely different kind of mechanism. Your freedom in this really profound sense begins exactly where your ignorance ends. This brilliant synthesis bridges the gap between these warring philosophies. As the French phrasing beautifully puts it, je suis déterminé à me déterminer, meaning I am determined to determine myself. It breaks the paradox perfectly. Yes, you are undeniably caught in the massive web of universal cause and effect. You are determined by your environment, your biology, your history. But the specific direction that force takes within you right now is the desire to become the active author of your own life. Lucidity doesn't paralyze you, it actually gives you unstoppable momentum. This is the ultimate transition from passive passion to active power. True spiritual and intellectual growth doesn't mean magically escaping the biological and physical laws of nature. It means standing upright within them. You accept the deterministic rules of reality. You acknowledge the traumas and the causes that shaped you, but you deliberately choose to deploy your full power, reason, and creativity within that framework. You're transforming passive suffering into active, dignified power. Now that you deeply understand the mechanics of your own determined nature, that you are not a broken machine, but a highly conscious participant in the massive chain of cause and effect, I want to leave you with this final thought. How will you use this profound clarity to shape your own reality moving forward? Where does this momentum push you to direct your energy today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.